My dad gave me an ultimatum. Music or family? I walked out and proved him wrong at a packed Chicago show. Hey everyone, I'm Jake Miller, 22, and I'm from Holland, Michigan out the Netherlands, but the little town in West Michigan that's obsessed with tulips. If you've never heard of it, picture a place where the biggest event of the year is the Tulip Time Festival in May, when the whole town turns into a postcard with millions of flowers, Dutch dancers in wooden shoes, and tourists snapping photos of windmills. It's the kind of small town where everyone knows your business, Mrs. Carter at the grocery store still asks me how my mom's doing, even though she passed away 10 years ago. And if you don't show up to the Friday night football game at Holland High, people start texting your parents to make sure you're not sick. It's quaint, sure, but growing up here always made me feel like I was stuck in a snow globe. Pretty to look at, but impossible to escape. I've never really fit the mold of what a Holland kid is supposed to be. Most of my classmates were into sports football, hockey, or track, or they joined 4-H, and spent their summers showing pigs at the Ottawa County Fair. Me? I was the weird kid who'd sneak into the music room during lunch to mess around on the school's beat-up acoustic guitar. I'd found it in the back of the room my freshman year, a scratched-up Yamaha with a missing string. But to me, it was a treasure. I'd sit there, skipping my turkey sandwich, and teach myself chords by ear, humming along to songs I'd heard on Spotify, mostly stuff like The Killers, Arctic Monkeys, and some older bands like The Strokes that I'd discovered on my mom's old iPod. Music was my thing, my escape, the one place where I didn't feel like I had to be someone I wasn't. My mom, Lisa, was the one who got me into music in the first place. She passed away from breast cancer when I was 12, and it's still hard to talk about her without feeling like there's a lump in my throat. She was the kind of mom who'd always have a cup of chamomile tea in her hand, her hair tied back in a messy bun, and she'd sit on our old plaid couch in the living room, listening to me strum her favorite Fleetwood Mac songs on her acoustic guitar. "Jake, you've got a gift," she'd say, her eyes lighting up. "Don't ever stop playing, okay?" I'd nod, my cheeks burning with pride, and keep going, even when my fingers ached. After she died, I clung to music even harder. It was like a piece of her I could still hold on to. I'd play her guitar, a beat-up Martin she'd bought at a garage sale in the 90s, until the strings left red marks on my fingertips, imagining she was still there, smiling at me. But things at home changed after Mom was gone. My dad, Bill, 50, threw himself into work, and I don't blame him. It was his way of coping. He runs an auto shop called Bill's Auto Repair on the edge of town, just off Lincoln Avenue, where the pavement turns to gravel and the air always smells faintly of motor oil and pine. It's a small, no-frills place, with a faded sign out front, a couple of garage bays, and a tiny office where Dad keeps a coffee maker that's probably older than I am. The shop's been in the family for 2 generations. Me grandpa started it in the 60s, and Dad took over when he was my age. He's proud of it, and I get why. It's a steady business, keeps the bills paid, and he's got a loyal crew, guys like Tony, who's been there since I was a kid, and always sneaks me a Snickers bar when Dad's not looking. But Dad's got this idea that I'm supposed to take over the shop one day, like it's written in stone or something. "Jake, you're a Miller," he'd say, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. "Millers fix cars, not strum guitars. You'll see that one day." I never had the heart to tell him I didn't want that life. I'd just nod, mumble something like, "Yeah, sure, Dad," and head to my room, where I'd plug in my Fender Stratocaster, a black and white beauty I'd saved up for, by mowing lawns the summer after junior year in play, until my amp buzzed with feedback. I'd close my eyes and imagine I was on a stage somewhere big, like the Fillmore in Detroit, with a crowd screaming my name, lights flashing, and my band behind me rocking out to a song I'd written myself. That dream kept me going, even on the days when Dad's disappointment felt like a weight I couldn't shake. Speaking of my band, we're called the Lake Effect, a little nod to Lake Michigan, which is just a 10-minute drive from my house. I started it with my best friend Ethan, who's 23 and the loudest drummer I've ever met, and Sarah, 21, our bassist, who we met at an open mic night at the Rusty Anchor, a dive bar downtown that smells like stale beer and fried pickles. Ethan's been my best friend since middle school. We bonded over sneaking into the school gym to shoot hoops after hours, and Sarah's the kind of person who can make anyone laugh, even when she's tuning her bass in the middle of a set. We started playing gigs around town last year, mostly small stuff like the Holland Farmers Market on Wednesdays, where we'd set up near the kettle corn stand and play for tips, or at the Rusty Anchor on Friday nights, where the crowd was usually more interested in their Bud Lights than our music. But we were getting better, and people started noticing. We'd get a few claps, a couple of bucks in our tip jar, and once, a little girl in a sunflower dress danced to our cover of Mr. Brightside, while her mom filmed it on her phone. It wasn't much, but it felt like the start of something. Then, about a month ago, everything changed. We got a spot at a music festival in Detroit Motor City Soundwave, a small indie fest at Hart Plaza, right by the river. It was our biggest gig yet, and I was a nervous wreck the whole week leading up to it. I must have changed my setlist a dozen times, pacing my room in my beat-up Converse, muttering lyrics to myself while Dad yelled from the living room to keep it down. I'm trying to watch the Tigers game. The drive to Detroit was a 4-hour road trip. Just me, Ethan, and Sarah crammed into Ethan's old Dodge Caravan with our gear rattling in the back. Ethan kept trying to lighten the mood, cracking jokes about our band name. "What if we called ourselves the Great Lakes Losers instead?" he said, grinning as he munched on a bag of Doritos. I laughed, tossing a guitar pick at him. "Keep dreaming, dude," I said, but I was too nervous to really joke around. This gig felt like our shot or one chance to be more than just a small-town band. The festival was incredible. Hart Plaza was packed with people hipsters in flannel, college kids with glow sticks, even a few older folks sipping craft beers from plastic cups. We played a 30-minute set on one of the smaller stages, opening with a song I'd written called Rust and Gasoline, about feeling trapped in a small town with big dreams. I poured everything into that performance. My voice was raw, my fingers flying over the strings, sweat dripping down my face as the crowd started to cheer. By the time we finished with the cover of Mr. Brightside, people were actually singing along, their voices echoing over the Detroit River. I looked over at Ethan, who was grinning like an idiot behind his drum kit, and Sarah, who gave me a nod, her bass still humming. It was the best we'd ever sounded. After our set, a guy in a leather jacket came up to us while we were packing up our gear. He was maybe 30, with a scruffy beard and a Motor City Records badge on his jacket. "I'm Marcus," he said, shaking my hand. "I work for an indie label here in Detroit. You guys have potential. Your sound's raw, but it's got heart. Send me a demo, and we might be able to get you in the studio." I was floored. I couldn't stop grinning, even as Ethan kept muttering, "We're basically famous now," under his breath. The drive back to Holland was a blur of adrenaline and laughter, the three of us belting out Sweet Child O' Mine at the top of our lungs, the windows down, the summer air rushing in. For the first time, I felt like my dream was actually within reach, like I could really make it, leave Holland behind, and become the musician I'd always wanted to be. But when I got home that night, the high came crashing down. It was late, almost midnight, and the house was dark except for the flickering blue light of the television in the living room. Dad was sitting in his old recliner, a bottle of Bud Light in his hand, the volume on low as some late-night infomercial about a miracle car wax played in the background. He didn't look up when I walked in, but I could tell he was waiting for me. His jaw was tight, his shoulders stiff, the way they always got when he was pissed. I dropped my guitar case by the door, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, Dad," I said, forcing a smile. "You'll never guess what happened tonight." He finally looked at me, his eyes hard, and I felt my stomach twist. "Where have you been, Jake?" he asked, his voice low and clipped. I took a deep breath and told him everything: the festival, the crowd, Marcus, the demo, the chance to record with a real label. I thought he'd be proud, at least a little happy for me. I mean, I was his kid, and I'd just gotten the biggest break of my life. But he just shook his head, taking a long sip of his beer, and said, "You're wasting your time with that noise. I need you at the shop tomorrow. We're short-staffed and I'm not getting any younger." I stared at him, my heart sinking. "Dad, this is a real shot," I said, my voice cracking. "I can't just—" "This isn't a discussion," he cut me off, his tone final. "You're a Miller, Jake. Start acting like one." He turned back to the television, like I wasn't even there, and I felt a wave of anger and hurt wash over me. I didn't say another word. I just grabbed my guitar case, stormed to my room, and slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. I plugged in my Strat, turned the amp up as loud as it would go, and played Rust and Gasoline until my fingers hurt, every note a rebellion against the life he wanted for me. I didn't care if he heard it. I wanted him to know I wasn't giving up, no matter what he said. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of burnt toast and the sound of Dad banging around in the kitchen. My head was pounding. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with everything that had happened at the festival in Detroit, and Dad's words echoing in my ears. You're a Miller, Jake. Start acting like one. I rolled out of bed, my old twin mattress creaking under me, and glanced at the clock on my nightstand 7:30 a.m. I knew Dad would expect me at the shop by 8, but all I could think about was Marcus's card, still tucked into the pocket of my jeans, and the demo we needed to record. I pulled on a faded Green Day t-shirt and my worn-out Converse, running a hand through my messy brown hair as I tried to shake off the dread settling in my chest. Downstairs, Dad was at the stove, flipping a piece of bacon in a skillet that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 90s. The kitchen was small, with peeling linoleum floors and a fridge covered in magnets from every tourist trap in Michigan Saugatuck, Mackinac Island, even a faded one from the Henry Ford Museum that Mom had bought on a family trip when I was 8. Dad didn't look up as I walked in, just pointed to a plate of slightly charred toast on the table. "Eat," he said, his voice gruff. "You're on the schedule today. Tony's out sick, and we've got a backlog of oil changes." I sat down, picking at the toast, my stomach too knotted to eat. "Dad," I was thinking. I started, trying to keep my tone casual. "Maybe I can work a few hours today, but I need some time this week to rehearse with the band. That label guy, Marcus Shee, really thinks we've got a shot." Dad turned off the burner, the sizzle of the bacon fading into an uncomfortable silence. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, the one with little sailboats on it that Mom had loved, and finally looked at me. His face was hard, his jaw set, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. "Jake, I told you last night this music stuff isn't a real job," he said, his voice low but firm. "You think you're gonna be the next big thing, playing your little songs in dive bars? That's not a future. The shop is. It's what's kept this family going since your mom." He stopped, his voice catching for a second, and I felt a pang of guilt. I knew how much Mom's death had broken him, how he'd thrown himself into the shop to keep from falling apart. But using her memory to guilt me into giving up my dream felt like a cheap shot. "Dad, I'm not saying I won't help out," I said, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "I'll do part-time like I always have, but I need to do this. Just give me a year to see if the band can make it. If it doesn't work, I'll come back to the shop, I promise." He shook his head, his expression darkening. "No more part-time," he said, his voice rising. "I'm done with this back and forth. You're either all in or you're out. I need you at the shop full-time starting today. No more band, no more gigs, no more wasting your life on a pipe dream." I stared at him, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're really making me choose?" He crossed his arms, his flannel shirt stained with grease from yesterday's work. "I'm not making you choose, Jake. I'm telling you what's right. You owe it to me and to your mom's memory to step up and be a man. Millers don't run off chasing fantasies. We work hard, we provide, we keep the family going. That's what I did after she died, and that's what you're gonna do now." I felt like I'd been slapped. Bringing Mom into this again, like she'd want me to give up the one thing that made me feel close to Harriet, was too much. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. "Mom would have wanted me to follow my dream," I said, my voice breaking. "She loved hearing me play. She'd be proud of me, even if you're not." Dad's face went red, his eyes flashing with something I couldn't quite read, anger, maybe, or guilt. "Don't you dare tell me what your mom would have wanted," he snapped, slamming his hand on the counter. "You think you're honoring her by running off to play rockstar? You're throwing away everything we've built for you. If you can't commit to the shop, then you can pack your bags and get out. I'm done with this nonsense." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. I stood there, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts, trying to process what he'd just said. He was really doing this, kicking me out if I didn't give up my music. I looked at him, searching for any sign of the dad who used to take me fishing at Lake Makatawa, the one who'd laugh at my terrible knock-knock jokes when I was a kid. But all I saw was a man who'd rather lose his son than let go of his idea of what I should be. I didn't say anything else. I turned and walked back to my room, my footsteps heavy on the creaky hardwood floor. My room was a mess clothes on the floor, a half-empty can of Mountain Dew on my desk, my Stratocaster leaning against the wall next to a stack of old Rolling Stone magazines. I grabbed my duffel bag from the closet, the one I'd used for camping trips with Ethan's family in high school, and started stuffing it with whatever I could fit: jeans, t-shirts, my laptop, a hoodie that still smelled faintly of Mom's lavender perfume. I hesitated when I got to my guitar, my fingers brushing the smooth black finish of the Strat. I couldn't leave it behind. It was part of me, part of her. I slung the gig bag over my shoulder, the weight of it grounding me, and took one last look around the room I'd grown up in. The faded Star Wars poster on the wall, the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that Mom had helped me stick up when I was 7. It all felt like a different life now. I went back to the kitchen, where Dad was still standing, his back to me as he stared out the window at the backyard. The old tire swing was still there, hanging from the oak tree, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. I pulled a piece of paper from the junk drawer, the one where we kept pens and takeout menus, and scribbled a note with a shaky hand. Dad, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'll make it with my music, and I'll do it without you. If you ever want to see me again, you'll have to decide if you can accept me for who I am. Goodbye. I left the note on the table, right next to the plate of cold toast, and walked out the front door. My beat-up Toyota Corolla was parked in the driveway, the same car I'd bought for $1,500 last year, with money I'd saved from working at the shop. I threw my bag and guitar in the back seat, started the engine, and drove off down M-40, the fog thick around me, my headlights cutting through the gray. I didn't look back, not at the house, not at the shop, not at the life I was leaving behind. I didn't have a plan when I left, just a duffel bag, my guitar, and a tank of gas that was already down to a quarter. I drove to Grand Rapids, about an hour from Holland, because I knew Ethan would let me crash at his place. Ethan's been my best friend since we were 13, when we got detention together for sneaking into the school gym to shoot hoops after hours. He's the kind of guy who'd give you the shirt off his back, even if it's his favorite Red Wings jersey, and I knew he'd have my back now. His apartment was in a sketchy part of town, a third-floor walk-up above a laundromat that always smelled like dryer sheets and burnt popcorn. It was a mess when I got there, empty Mountain Dew cans on the coffee table, a drum set taking up half the living room, and a pile of unwashed dishes in the sink that looked like a science experiment gone wrong. But when Ethan opened the door, his hair a mess and his Nirvana t-shirt wrinkled, he just grinned and said, "Dude, you look like crap. Get in here." I dropped my bag by the door and collapsed onto his couch, a lumpy gray thing that smelled faintly of pizza and weed. Ethan grabbed 2 cans of Mountain Dew from the fridge, tossing one to me, and sat on the floor, leaning against his drum kit. "So, what's the deal?" he asked, cracking open his can. "You and your dad have another fight?" I took a long sip, the cold soda burning my throat, and told him everything: the festival, Marcus, the ultimatum, the note. Ethan listened, his usual goofy grin fading as I talked. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Man, that's rough," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But you did the right thing. You can't let him kill your dream, Jake. The lake effect, we're so close. That demo's gonna change everything." I nodded, trying to believe him. But the weight of what I'd done was starting to sink in. I'd left home, really left, with no idea if I'd ever go back. I checked my phone, hoping for a text from Dad, an apology, anything. But there was nothing, just a notification from Sarah about a new song idea she'd been working on. I put my phone down, my chest tight, and looked at Ethan. "I just hope I didn't screw everything up," I said quietly. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grin returning. "Nah, man, you're Jake freaking Miller. You're gonna be a rock star. And if your dad can't see that, that's his loss." I forced a smile, but inside, I wasn't so sure. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of music and survival. I slept on Ethan's couch, which was about as comfortable as a pile of bricks, and lived off cheap food ramen noodles, Taco Bell runs, and whatever leftovers Sarah brought over when she came to rehearse. Sarah was a lifesaver, showing up with a bag of Crunchwrap Supremes and a new riff she'd been messing with on her bass. "You okay, Jake?" she'd ask, her hazel eyes soft with concern, and I'd nod, even though I wasn't sure I was. We threw ourselves into recording our demo, renting a cheap studio we found on Craigslist, a basement in some guy's house in East Grand Rapids, with egg cartons stapled to the walls for soundproofing, and a faint smell of mildew in the air. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We recorded 3 songs, including Rust and Gasoline, the one I'd written the night I left home. I poured everything into that song: me anger, my hurt, my longing for something more, my voice cracking on the high notes, my fingers trembling on the strings. Ethan and Sarah kept me sane through it all. Sarah would blast her 90s pop playlist on her phone to lighten the mood, dancing around the studio to Britney Spears while Ethan and I laughed so hard we couldn't play. Ethan, meanwhile, kept coming up with terrible band name ideas just to mess with me. "What about the Great Lakes Losers?" he'd say, dodging the empty water bottle I threw at him. Or Midwest Sad Boys? Come on, it's got a vibe. I'd roll my eyes, but I couldn't help but laugh. Those moments joking around with my band, making music in a dingy basement felt like freedom, like I was finally living the life I'd always wanted. But every night when I'd crash on Ethan's couch, I'd check my phone, hoping for a message from Dad. Nothing. Not a call, not a text, not even a missed call. It was like I disappeared from his life, and the thought made my chest ache in a way I couldn't ignore. One night, after a long day in the studio, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw a post from a local Holland page. It was a photo of Dad at the shop, standing in front of the garage bay with his crew, holding a Best Small Business Award from the Holland Chamber of Commerce. He was smiling, his arm around Tony, who was holding a wrench, like it was a trophy. The caption read, "Congrats to Bill's Auto Repair for keeping Holland running for 30 years. I stared at the photo, my thumb hovering over the screen. He looked really happy, like he didn't even miss me. I felt a lump in my throat, a mix of anger and sadness I couldn't shake. I turned off my phone, picked up my guitar, and played Rust and Gasoline until my fingers bled, the lyrics pouring out of me like a confession. I'm burning out in this rust and gasoline, chasing dreams you'll never see. I didn't know if I was playing for myself, for Mom, or for the dad I wished I had, but I knew I couldn't stop, not now. A month later, we got the call we'd been waiting for. Marcus, the label rep from Motor City Records, emailed me one morning while I was eating a bowl of off-brand Frosted Flakes on Ethan's couch, the spoon halfway to my mouth. "Jake, I listened to your demo," his email read. "Love the energy, especially on Rust and Gasoline. I want to book the Lake Effect for a showcase gig in Chicago next month at the Empty Bottle. It's a small venue, but there'll be industry people there. If you impress them, we can talk about a contract." I read the email 3 times to make sure I wasn't dreaming, then ran into the living room, where Ethan was sprawled on the floor scrolling through TikTok. "Dude, we got a gig in Chicago!" I shouted, waving my phone in his face. He jumped up, nearly knocking over his drum throne, and tackled me in a bear hug. "We're gonna be famous!" he yelled. And for once, I didn't throw anything at him for saying it. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. We rehearsed every day, borrowing a van from Sarah's cousin, a rusty Ford Econoline with a broken AC and a bumper sticker that said, "I'd rather be fishing to haul our gear." Sarah made us a playlist for the road trip, a mix of our favorite bands and some guilty pleasures. She insisted on adding Wannabe by the Spice Girls, which Ethan and I groaned about but secretly sang along to. We spent hours in Ethan's apartment, running through our set list, tweaking lyrics, and arguing over whether to open with Rust and Gasoline or a faster song to grab the crowd's attention. "We've got to start strong," Sarah said, tuning her bass, her hair tied back with a scrunchie. "Let's open with Gasoline, it's got that raw energy." I nodded, my stomach a mess of nerves and excitement. This gig was our shot, and I wasn't going to let anything mess it up. The drive to Chicago was a 6-hour haul, the 3 of us crammed into the van with our gear rattling in the back. We stopped at a McDonald's in Indiana for dinner. Ethan got a Big Mac. Sarah got a McFlurry that melted before she could finish it, and I just picked at my fries, too nervous to eat. By the time we got to the Empty Bottle in Wicker Park, it was 7 p.m., and the street outside was buzzing with people hipsters in vintage band tees, college kids with fake IDs, and a few older guys in leather jackets who looked like they'd been to every punk show in the city since the 80s. The venue was small, with a sticky floor and graffiti on the bathroom walls, but it had a vibe-dim lights, a stage barely big enough for Ethan's drum kit, and a crowd that was already half drunk and ready to dance. We took the stage at 9 p.m., the lights hot on my face, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the crowd. I adjusted the mic, my hands sweaty on my Strat, and looked out at the sea of faces, about 200 people, packed in tight, their voices a low hum of anticipation. "Hey, Chicago, we're the Lake Effect from Holland, Michigan," I said, my voice shaking a little. "This one's called Rust and Gasoline." Ethan counted us in with a 4-stick click, and we launched into the song, the opening riff cutting through the air like a knife. I poured everything into that performance. My voice was raw, my fingers flying over the strings, the lyrics spilling out of me like they were written in my blood. The crowd started to move, heads bobbing, a few people in the front singing along by the second chorus. By the time we got to the bridge, I was screaming the words. I'm burning out in this rust and gasoline, chasing dreams you'll never see, and the crowd was screaming with me, their voices echoing off the walls. We played a 40-minute set, mixing our originals with a couple of covers, Mr. Brightside by The Killers and Everlong by Foo Fighters, that got the whole room singing. Ethan was a beast on the drums, his sticks a blur, and Sarah was killing it on bass, her energy infectious as she danced across the stage. When we finished our last song, the crowd erupted, cheering so loud I could feel it in my chest. "Encore, encore!" they shouted, and I looked at Ethan and Sarah, both of them grinning like idiots. We played one more song, an acoustic version of Rust and Gasoline that I'd been working on, just me and my guitar, my voice soft and broken as I sang the final lines. The room went quiet, the crowd swaying, a few people holding up their phone flashlights like it was a stadium show. When I strummed the last chord, the applause was deafening. After the show, Marcus came backstage, shaking my hand so hard I thought he'd break it. "You guys killed it," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "I've got some people who want to meet you. Let's talk next week about a contract." I couldn't stop smiling, even as Ethan kept joking. "We're basically famous now. Should we get matching leather jackets?" Sarah laughed, punching him in the arm. "Only if they're from Hot Topic," she said, and I chuckled, the adrenaline still coursing through me. The gig had been live-streamed on YouTube. Sarah had posted the link on our band's Instagram, tagging the empty bottle and Motor City Records stand. I couldn't help but wonder if Dad had seen it. I checked my phone, my hands trembling as I scrolled through my notifications. A few likes on the livestream post, a text from Sarah's cousin saying, "You guys rock," but nothing from Dad. My heart sank, but I pushed the feeling down. I'd made my choice, and I wasn't going to let his silence ruin this moment. Back in Holland, Bill was sitting in his recliner, the living room dark except for the glow of his phone screen. He'd seen the Instagram post about the gig. Tony had sent it to him earlier that day, texting, "Your kid's killing it in Chicago, boss!" Bill had hesitated, his thumb hovering over the link, before finally clicking it. The live stream started, and he watched as Jake took the stage, his son's voice filling the room, raw and powerful. He recognized the song Rust and Gasoline, and the lyrics hit him like a punch to the gut. "I'm burning out in this rust and gasoline, chasing dreams you'll never see." Bill's heightened around his bottle of Bud Light, the condensation dripping onto his jeans. He thought about the note Jake had left, the one he'd kept in his desk drawer at the shop, reading it over and over since that night. "If you ever want to see me again, you'll have to decide if you can accept me for who I am." The live stream ended, the screen going black, and Bill sat there in the silence, his thumb hovering over Jake's contact in his phone. He wanted to call, to say something, but he couldn't bring himself to press the button. Not yet. I don't know if Dad watched that live stream, or if he'll ever reach out. I don't know if he'll ever accept that I'm not the son he wanted me to be, the one who'd take over the shop and carry on the Miller legacy. But that night in Chicago, with the crowd cheering and my band by my side, I knew I'd made the right choice. I left him with an open-ended goodbye, a chance to change his mind and meet me halfway. Maybe one day I'll get a text from him, or see him in the crowd at one of our shows, his old flannel shirt standing out among the sea of leather jackets. Or maybe I won't. Either way, I'm not looking back, I'm chasing my dream. And I'm not stopping for anyone.